Hello there, I'm K-Ball, and welcome to Human Skills, where I interview tech industry leaders about all the non-technical skills that go into success in the tech industry. In this interview, I speak with Lea Kissner. Lea has been the global lead of privacy technology for Google, worked as a privacy consultant for Zoom at the beginning of the pandemic as it exploded in popularity, and most recently was head of privacy engineering and chief information security officer at Twitter. Lea once told me that if a job doesn't involve facing down hostile state actors, they aren't interested. In this conversation, we talk about communication tactics, working across teams, and how to tell people things they don't want to hear. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Lea Kissner. All right. Hello and welcome to an interview for the Human Skills Podcast. I'm K-Ball. I am the host, and I'm joined today by my lovely former colleague, Lea Kissner. Lea, how are you?
Doing great. How are you?
Yeah, no, I was excited to talk with you because we were actually, when we met up the other day just for a casual conversation, you had so many different interesting thoughts and insights, and your perspective on the way that human skills are impactful in technical careers. It was really interesting. So I kind of want to dig on that. But first, before we go into any particular topic, what is your take on these soft skills or human skills and why they are valuable for technical folks?
Yeah, no one told me that dealing with human beings was a job skill. Like, I managed to get a PhD and not realize that dealing with humans was a job skill until I was in the middle of my interviews, and people would stop interviewing me and then start interviewing me for a different job. I was like, what's going on? They're like, you speak math and English. And I was like, yes, I do. What? But what I realized once I had a job that was not me and a blackboard and a pile of papers, because my PhD is in a math discipline, basically. What I realized is that if you want to do anything big, it's not just you, right? You can't. And so the larger thing you want to touch and the more impact that you want to have, you will be working with humans. And it's not going to go unless you are really, really good at working with humans. So it's absolutely a critical job skill.
Yeah, well, and I feel like we don't teach that in school for some reason, and maybe don't even interview for it, at least in entry-level jobs. And then at some point along the way, it starts to be critical.
It depends on who's interviewing. So for a bunch of teams that I've run, we actually do interview for people skills so I have run a lot of teams in security and privacy. And we touch every single part of the business. It's one of my favorite things, right? I get to put my fingers in everybody's business and just show up and help. It's great. But that also means that I spend a lot of time all up in people's business, like we're dealing with people all of the time. And it also means that we spend a lot of time telling people things they don't want to hear. And if I show up and tell somebody things they don't want to hear in a way that is not clear and not going to cause a conflict, right? And not a disagreement, but I mean just if I show up and piss people off, it turns out I'm being really bad at my job. So we will 100% interview for things like, do you know how to say things that people don't want to hear? Do you know how to work with people? Especially like it's their system, right? I'm not the expert on the system that you run. I don't know it as well as you do. And that's perfectly fine. It's perfectly okay. But in order for us to do a really good job, you probably need some of the information that I have in my head and some of the skills that I had, and we need all of the things that you have, right? Everyone has something to teach and something to learn. So I need to show up and show up in a way that is helpful in order to actually help.
I love what you're talking there about being able to communicate with someone about something they don't want to hear. Do you have any particular tactics or a way that you think about approaching that?
Yeah, so when I show up to tell somebody something that they don't want to hear, I think there are a couple of things that are really important. One of them is I show up and I am very, very clear, and I think it tends to come across to people like I'm super sincere. I can't lie. even if I wanted to. But I show up and I'm just like, hi, I'm here to help. I am here to help you do a great job. You want to build great systems, that is what I am here to help you with. So we are very much aligned. We are going in the same direction. We may not agree about how best to get to that place, but we agree on what the goal is. And I am very clearly like trying to show up and help. I'm not trying to show up and tell somebody that they're stupid, right? And that's one of the things that people worry about a lot is like, am I showing up to tell them that they're stupid? The other thing that can happen is somebody thinking that you're trying to take over their turf. I don't care about your turf. I do not care about your turf. Your turf is great. Can I help you with your turf, right? So being really clear that like, I am there to help you. This is your project. This is your glory. I am not trying to take any of that away from you. Really, really helps. Clarity really helps. And that one of the things that people tend to show up with a lot, especially technical people, is we tend to show up and we go, hey, what about this technical thing? And they're like, I have this technical thing and I have this other thing over here. And what you've just handed me is like, I had a bunch of apples and you just handed me a flaming banana and I don't know what to do with these things. So actually, a security team at a former employer used to borrow me to show up to people and help them understand how they could make trade-offs. So if we show up and we say, you have this technical vulnerability, right? And this poor VP is like, I don't know what to do with that. You're telling me, for example, I shouldn't launch this thing. Concrete example, somebody said, hey, you have this technical vulnerability. The VP was like, I'm going to launch my thing. I had the vulnerability before. Why is this any different? I have to go, like, this feature is important to launch. Security team borrowed me to go in. And I go in and I say, let me explain what the New York Times headline is going to be probably if you launch this thing. This is what the story is, and this is how people are going to see it. And he's like, oh, I can't launch that. Now it's like, you are right. You don't want to launch that thing, right? But once you give it to somebody in business terms, like the same denomination they're already playing in, they can actually weight things appropriately.
I love that for a couple of reasons. So first, you've talked about you're meeting them where they are, right? You're aligning to their goals and their view of the world. You're showing them the problem in their views and their goal of the world. And now you're on the same side. This is the problem. It exists. I did not create this problem for you. It may not be your fault that this problem is here, but this problem exists. It's going to keep you from getting where you want to go. And I'm here to help.
Yes, that part is also really important where there are sometimes when I will show up and say, like, information theory tells us that you cannot actually do this thing. I literally had this argument with a team once where they were like, we're going to do this thing. And I said, information theory says that you cannot actually do this thing. And they're like, we're going to do it anyways. And you know what? Information theory was right. Information theory is generally right. That's how information theory works. But almost always, I'm showing up with a, let's go and figure out how to get you where you want to go, right? You may need to back up 3 steps and explain what it is you actually want as opposed to the design that you want to launch. Like, I'm going to go and try and help you get there. You probably don't want to do it the terrifying way. Let's find the easier way to do this. That really helps. There is prep work for this sometimes, right? Where there are layers of this, right? This is what you do in the moment, but there is also work that you can do beforehand that is going to make this easier. And this is work that is really helpful to have your executives on board with. So maybe you need to get them on board with it. Maybe they're already on board with it, but you want them selling this too. So in my case, what I tend to do is I want people to understand that doing security and privacy right is part of having that great product that they want. I mean, in part because it makes for a better product, but also because it turns out that Regulators get super grumpy at you, and if you would like to continue having a product, not pissing off regulators and not pissing off your users is usually a very, very good call. But that's kind of a long set of explanations to put in front of, here's our technical problem right now. You can actually lay a lot of that groundwork in advance. So some of that is like getting people to understand that, like, I am here to help, and like, I want you to be able to launch a thing and then spend that time right after you launch your new feature actually looking at the feedback and refining the feature, as opposed to doing a bunch of incident work, which, you know, we could just not. We could just skip that part and do the part that you actually want to do. So going and explaining that, finding language that resonates. I will literally A/B test language on people. I will say, okay, well, we need to think a bunch about, I don't know, not launching incidents, or or like compliance. No one, like almost nobody outside of an extremely highly regulated industry where it's drilled into people, finds compliance very motivating, right? It might be very important, but they don't find it intrinsically motivating. And a lot of, especially tech folks, are like, it's so boring and I don't care, right? But like they care about what the actual thing is. It just, you need to find different language about it. So I will just start using different bits of language until I start hearing it echoed back. And once I hear it back, getting echoed back from people other than I send it to, right, I know I found something that like hits that resonance frequency of the organization. And I'm like, great, I found something that conveys that message, and we can start using that. It's going to help people move, just in the same way that like finding the resonant frequency of an object moves it much more. Language does that exact same thing.
I love this idea of A/B testing messaging, and it's something that I've played around with as well. I'm curious, well, one, how rigorous are you? Like, are you literally like writing down, okay, I'm going to test this with this person and that with that person? And then beyond that, like, how do you, like, are there shortcuts that you can take? Are there ways that you can kind of try to piggyback on existing language or company values or other different things that gets you to that resonant frequency faster?
This is a really good question. So I don't test it that rigorously. It's actually impossible to, because a lot of company cultures are pretty document heavy. And so you're not going to be tracing exactly who saw what when. Please don't. That's creepy. So it's a little bit more informal than that. Sorry, I forgot your second question.
The second question was, are there any shortcuts you can take to finding the sort of resonant frequencies? Can you tap into other company language, to company values, to other things in a way that is likely to help you find something that's going to resonate sooner?
Yes, you can totally take shortcuts on this. The first one is check the house style. So every company has a style of communication that they use. Some places are very formal. Some places are very informal. Some places use really long sentences. Some places are very, very short. I will tend to default to very, very clear, very short language, because it tends to work really, really well. But look at the house style. So, for example, I had a tricky situation going on with an identity team who would introduce issues into their designs by not necessarily differentiating between the human behind an account and the actual account. And they would call them both user, right? And they're not the same thing. And after like a week of asking them, do you mean a sack of meat or a sack of bits? Let me tell you, did not have the problem anymore, right? That was a very sticky message for them. But there are companies that I've been in, if I start asking people, do you mean the sack of meat? They're not going to take it super well, right? Listen to the language that people are using, not just for style, but like you said, for content. So if you hear people using particular words, totally use those. If people ask, if So the reason I hesitate to say look at the values of the company is because a lot of companies, those values are not actually what anybody cares about. Twitter had a set of values, for example, and then Twitter had an older set of values, and people actually mostly used the older ones. So you could use that language. So you want to listen.
It's like the de facto values, the ones that are actually being used and talked about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's just a part of tying to the things that people care about, and the language that people use. So you can totally do that. There are probably people in your field who have spent a whole bunch of time figuring out language that works for certain things. You can totally steal it, and use that language, right? For example, I use the language of respect, right? I say, like, we want to build something that is respectful of users. You know why I started using that language? I was having these stupid conversations with people, with arguments where they were like, well, why am I talking to you about this? Is this a security issue? Is this a privacy issue? I was like, is it a problem for your users? And they're like, yes. I was like, then we're having this conversation, right? And I short-circuited a lot of really silly, time-wasting discussions that way because we were like, we could just not have that discussion. That's actually another piece of advice that I would give. There are pieces of language that start fights. You could just skip all of those fights if you want to. And I don't just mean the Emacs versus EVI thing, although like pulling that up in the middle of your design doc is a good way for nobody to read your design doc for real. But, okay, so one example from security is there's this thing called a capability model. Never use that word. Just never use that word because there are three things that happen when people use that word. One, they're a capability zealot who will then proceed to tell everybody else in the general vicinity that capabilities is better than anything else they were using, which isn't usually super helpful. Two, they are not a capability zealot, and they will start arguing with you about whether capabilities are good and pay absolutely zero attention to the actual design. And the third one is they are not a security person and they are instantly confused because the word capabilities is very overloaded. So I've built capability systems. I've built several of them. None of them are called a capability system because I found out that if I don't use that word, we don't have weird arguments. I have gotten things launched because I changed what I called it. There was a certificate revocation system for internal certificates for security purposes that I launched, that I called, and I am 100% not kidding, the Happy Fun Time Certificate Freshness List. We should have made t-shirts. It would have been amazing. And the reason I called it that is because the Site Reliability Engineering Organization had said we were never launching a certificate revocation list over our dead bodies. And if I used that word, everybody freaked out, and I was like, great, I need you to actually engage your brain and look at the thing right now. And they looked at the way I was doing it, which was different in the standard way in a couple of important ways. And they were like, oh yeah, we should totally launch that. And I was like, great. I actually had somebody look at it and be like, oh, this is a certificate revocation list. We're never launching this. Sent it to the guy who had said, like, over my dead body. And he was like, no, it's fine. Right? And that only happened because I used words that didn't cause people to start fights.
So some of this almost, and this is a little dangerous to go here, but almost sounds like the games that politicians play with naming of bills and things like that. And the reason I bring this up is you at some point said, once we start talking about this, people think, oh, that's politics, and their brains shut off, right? Oh, it's not about my execution anymore, which is what I care about. It's about politics. That's bad. But I feel like what you've been saying, this is just part of your job.
This is how I get things done, man. I get things launched, or I get things fixed, or I get things designed better by being able to go and actually have a conversation about it. I can't do everything myself. Like I am very aware that I am not smart about everything in the world. I need to work with other people. Also, I sleep sometimes. Like it requires a team with a lot of different skills to get anything done. And I have seen a lot of engineers say like, oh, you're talking to people, so it's politics. I'm like, no, it's engineering. I learned so much about how not to blow up production systems that is incredibly valuable because I went and said, hey, there's this problem and I was thinking that, maybe we could go fix it. And it seems like this is why it's important. I have some ideas, but I am very, very aware. And it's very important to say that. I am very aware that you know more than I do about this thing. Does this make sense? Is it going to explode? And if you show up and you're like honestly asking questions of people, they will tend to tell you all sorts of super, super useful, interesting things. And then you could go solve the problem. It's great.
Yeah. Now, that's an interesting one as well to dig into, which is questions. I feel like you and I have in common that we like to ask questions. We go and ask lots of questions. We're unafraid of asking the dumb question and all of these different things. But I've had people ask me, like, how do you know what to ask? How do you think about that? Like, where do you come up with these questions?
So I ask questions for a bunch of different reasons. For one, I actually preface asking a lot of questions with setting people's expectations, because there are people where you show up and you ask them a lot of questions and they see that as very threatening. Now, most people don't tend to see me as like terribly threatening. I am not usually a very scary individual. Usually, apparently some people found me terrifying, but it was because I tended to find things wrong in their designs that they didn't realize were there and they had to restart their project. So like leaving that aside, people don't tend to find me super intimidating or anything. But if you show up and you're like, I have a lot of awkward questions to ask you, and you don't just name like, hey, I learned by asking questions. Like, I'm going to ask you all of the awkward questions. Cool? And like very genuinely convey, I am trying to figure things out and learn. I'm not trying to challenge you. Goes much better.
There's a fundamental humility piece of that, of just saying like, you know what, I'm gonna upfront say I don't know everything. Some of these questions are going to be totally stupid, but this is how I learn. I'm
going to push back on you about part of that. I don't want to say that the questions are stupid, and there's a very particular reason I don't say that, which is, so I used to say something which was, well, look, I was like, look, if your like security engineer knows the thing, then it like can't be very hard, right? Or like if I am asked, so anything which implies that something might be stupid, and they were like, you know things we don't know. Why are you calling us stupid? And I was like, oh, did not realize that implication, right? Other people are going to have the same question, and that's the first set of questions I ask, like in a design review. There are a lot of times when people are very unclear about like exactly what they're doing in a situation, and a lot of time if you pick up that rock and you turn it over, there's just nothing underneath, right? They haven't thought about it. Sometimes it's impossible. Sometimes they're unclear and people are making different assumptions about it. So that is the first set of questions that I am always asking, where I'm like, I don't get it, right? And so I will leave a lot of questions on docs. I will ask questions in talks, and I'm just like, hi, I don't get it. Can you explain this part? I get so many messages where people are like, oh, thank you for asking. And I'm just like, no, it's fine. All of us ask. And I've actually had people ask, aren't you afraid that people are going to think that you're not very smart? And I'm like, no, I just assume people don't think I'm smart. I don't care, right? Like they can think I'm an idiot. I still want to know what's in this place that they really didn't explain, and there might be something super weird about it. There's another set of questions that I ask a lot, and some of that is because I am a security privacy person, so I'm asking about things that explode, or I'm concerned about things that explode. So I ask a lot of questions where I'm like, I'm not sure I understand this. Does this do X? Or I don't understand here. Hey, if this does X, then I think Y is also true, and X plus Y equals thingo explode. Right? And I do that instead of saying your thing's broken for a couple of reasons. One of them is I am extremely aware that I'm not omniscient, right? I might be wrong about X, I might be wrong about Y, and I might be wrong about the way they combine, and I may be missing that there are safeguards against that somewhere. And if I ask that in that way, people can follow my reasoning and say, hey, oh yeah, it turns out there's this other thing. And I'm like, that's amazing. I'm so happy. I'm glad a thing isn't exploding. It's also less challenging, right? It doesn't,
Yeah. No, I love that framing of, I don't understand. Here's where I'm at. Please explain.
Yeah, that one tends to work pretty well for me. There was interestingly, there was a leadership class I got sent to. I think it's about the only leadership class I've ever been sent to. And most of it was just, how do you ask questions that don't have a predetermined set of answers? And I was like, yeah, this is what I do all day. I'm fine, right? Like they were like, yeah, that's what you do. You're fine. But it was really interesting because I didn't realize just how important this was to learn, because this is just kind of the native way I ask questions. And some of the people I went to that class with reported later that like they had a lot of success with changing their questioning style to be a lot more, hey, what's going on here? Like giving kind of open-ended questions. There are some other there's another kind of set of questions I ask, especially when I'm trying to help people develop, right? Part of my job as a mentor or a manager or anything is to help people understand the questions they should be asking themselves and others. So they're running into a problem, and so I will ask them, well, what do you think you should be doing? How does this combine with this other thing? Are you thinking, how are you thinking about that? Right. And I specifically ask, how are you thinking about that rather than are you thinking about that, even if they aren't, right? It's not just less threatening. It doesn't make assumptions. And asking, how does this fit in with other things? What is the goal of this? How do we measure, right? And then I've been told that people get like Lea voice installed in the back of their head.
I have heard a similar thing, right? I've been called the best rubber duck because it's exactly that, right? You're just asking questions that force them to look again at how they're thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. There was, I don't know if it's a good time to tell you about this, but there was one other thing at that leadership training that was actually useful. Have you ever heard of the Cynefin? Cynefin. It is a Welsh word. And it has been incredibly useful because it's this breakdown between different kinds of problems. So the first one is, they say simple. I think that's unnecessarily pejorative. I think of it as well understood, right? These are problems that you can solve with a checklist. You can be so efficient, right? You can just smooth that sucker right out. You can automate a lot of it. It's great for that. And then there are problems that are complicated, and you have to take all of your brain skills and like really hammer on that guy, and then figure it out, and you get to the end and you're like, you have figured out the solution to this thing. You've solved this problem. And then there are complex problems. And complex problems are the ones where you're like, I don't know, man. Like, no one knows. We're starting from first principles. There's no real answer to this. There's just a weird changing set of trade-offs. And there's also chaos, which you don't want to be in too much because that's a whole other business. But it's really useful to have this particular breakdown for a couple of reasons. One, it is a good way to help people understand which kind of techniques work to solve which kind of problems, right? I have had so many conversations with people where they're like, let's do a checklist for algorithmic fairness. And you're like, that is a research problem. Research problems live over here in complex. Checklists are techniques that we use to solve simple problems. Those don't match, right? And this is why you're, and like it really helps people understand that. The other thing that it's super useful for is people tend to sort primarily, like there's going to be a place that you feel at home. Most technical people, that is complicated problems. There are some people who are just like freaking love just making things run on rails. And there are some people who are like, you know what I love is a research problem, and if it's not weird, I'm not sufficiently interested. So I am one of the people who like natively falls into complex. I am never as happy as when you're like, this thing is weird, it's on fire, and we don't know what to do. And I'm like, great, I am like in my element. But a lot of people find that super stressful. So helping people figure out where they fit and where they feel at home. Choose jobs where at least a lot of your work is somewhere that you feel at home. And when you're stretching into a different place, be aware that like you're stretching into a different place. I can do well understood problems, but if I do them for too much of my job, I get bored in it and I'm not very good. And that makes me actually not good at it, right? This is not me saying that I am above those. I'm saying I am not good at them.
No, I resonate very strongly with exactly that distinction, right? I love that messy early stage when you're trying to figure out something out of nothing or something out of too little. And then once it starts to get too well defined, even if there's a lot of complicated things to still build out and implement, I lose interest. And as such, I can force myself to do it, but I'm going to do a lot less good of a job than someone for whom that is their happy place.
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons why finding people to work with who have different skills and different happy places is good, because you're a much more effective team. But the other thing that I'll point out is that people stuff largely fits in complex. Not entirely, but there's a fair number of people things that fit in complex. And a lot of technical people feel really at home in complicated. So the, I don't know, people are weird stuff is very normal, right? That's not necessarily where you feel natively happy. And you know, I learned how to do people stuff the hard way, very much so. And so even though complex problems are my jam, right, I still had to learn it the hard way, and it was very hard. So anyways, I find that one super, super useful to pull out a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I want to follow that thread a little bit because I love your description of people challenges as complex challenges. Are there subdomains that we can pull out that are well enough understood that maybe they could be modeled in a complicated fashion or even a simple fashion, such that it's learnable, it's easier to tackle?
I think the trick to that is building structures. So, and having people understand the boundaries of that structure. So, engineering design review, right? You build, like, a lot of people have done those before. You're like, and they'll look different at different companies, but like someone built a document or slides or whatever. We're going to pass the document around and people will make comments within this amount of time, and then we will do this. Or you're going to give a presentation and people are going to ask a lot of questions, and then we pass around a document, right? Like whatever that looks like, it's a lot more structured, and so people tend to.
Yeah. So that has translated that and sort of almost crystallize it into here's a thing that we can work through in a more predictable way.
So I think that usually the trick of that is find something that's a little more structured. I think there are some techniques that I use to reduce the amount of complication in discussions, or the amount of complexity in discussions to a certain extent, which is I try to get everybody to just say the freaking thing that they are thinking. Because if people are thinking a bunch of things and they don't tell me, like, I can't help you. I'm not a mind reader, and I can't help you. So there are a couple things. One of them is I'm super open, right? I'm super open. You want to know something? I will tell you. You probably don't have to wait. I will just tell you anything that I think might be helpful for you. I'm very clear that I am there to help. Like if I'm not, I have no like secret agenda. I will tell you exactly what my nefarious plan is. I will use those words. I will say like, oh, I have a nefarious plan. My nefarious plan is to get the CI/CD pipeline to work really well with this thing. So, and then we will have this other thing. And also it seems like it will make everybody's development life better. And people will be like, cool. And I was like, it's probably not a good nefarious plan if I just tell you, but it works, right? I just tell people that's my nefarious plan. But then I ask them, right? And I say like, I'm gonna try and help you. If you tell me what you want, I'm gonna be much better at it. Now this doesn't suck all the drama out of things, but just being super upfront about stuff and telling people you're gonna be super upfront about it, and asking them what it is that they think and what they want, it tends to suck a lot of the like many layers of drama out of situations. Also, refusing to get caught up in people's turf battles. I don't care. I just want people to do a good job at things, right? I don't want your organization. I don't care.
So I love those techniques, especially they're simple, right? It's like, okay, I'm just going to tell you what I want, and I'm going to ask you what you want. I'm not going to get caught up in your turf battle.
It is an amazing negotiation technique. Like, this is literally my negotiation technique. It's just to tell people exactly what I want and why, and say, I'm not omniscient. This might not be the best option. What is it that you're optimizing for? And that it won't work in every organization, right? There are some organizations that are very heavily steeped in, well, if I don't tell you things, then you can't like screw me over. Usually people will just end up telling me anyways because I'm clearly not trying to screw anybody over. But there are some organizations where that won't work very well. Honestly, I generally choose to work in organizations where, hey, I'm just going to say the thing, works relatively well.
Any other tactics that come to mind for reducing the complexity in individual conversations or group conversations?
I don't think so. It's mostly how can you add structure to things, and how can you make it so that it's safe for everybody to put their cards on the table, and encouraged for everybody to put their cards on the table, and then you deal honestly with that.
Love it. I want to go in another direction because it was something that you mentioned to me in our last conversation, and I thought, there's gold in there somewhere. Let's dig. So you talked about leading whole company initiatives, and in some ways I bundled this as a particular case of just leading cross-functional initiatives in general, initiatives that span beyond your particular team or department. And it sounded like you had quite a bit of experience there, and perhaps sometimes we're able to bring that when nobody else was being able to do it. So I want to just kind of dig in a little bit. How do you think about that? What are the tactics that you use? And what have you found to be most effective or most ineffective?
So smaller scale cross-functional or cross-team initiatives are actually pretty different than doing something that's large scale, right? In the smaller scale ones, you'll tend to do things like say, okay, we have shared OKRs and we're going to go and like maybe jointly track against them. But it's much more tractable to do this on a human level where like people talk to each other. There's a certain point at which you cannot talk to literally every human being who is involved in something all the time. I've done a lot of projects which are of the form, so we're all going to go do this thing now. We're all going to go fix the thing. We're all going to go do the activity. So at that point, we end up with a couple of things. One of them is making sure that everybody knows what we're doing and why it is important and how we have tried our absolute level best to make that as easy as possible on them. Right? I make sure this is in all of the emails that we send out about this. It will literally just be like, what it is that we do, that we need you to do. Why is it really important? You know, we have tried to make this as easy as possible. So, okay, so for example, let's say, done a bunch of ACL projects. I need you to set some ACLs on your freaking services, right? What do I need you to do? Hey, we're going to send you some guesses. We're going to send you some recommendations for what we think you probably want for your ACLs on your different services. We need you to check those and edit them or confirm them. And here's what, and then we will help you roll them out. Details over in another thing. Keep your emails real short. Why? 2 reasons. One, it turns out that security is awesome, and you don't want somebody who's nefarious or somebody who's taken over your account to go and use your account to go and violate the privacy of our users. Like, that would be horrible. And it turns out that you probably don't want the intern taking your service down because you've just let everybody touch it. See, so like lots of reasons why you should do this. How have we made this easier? We tried to guess for you, but you don't want us to guess because we might cut somebody off and you're going to be really sad. Don't make us guess about your system, right? So we'll send emails out like that. But we will also do things like go and talk to all the executives so that when somebody is like, hey, they're going to go complain to their VP when you send this thing out. Somebody is going to do it. You want them that VP to be like, oh, yes, I know what this is and why this is important. Cool, you should definitely do this thing. You also want your management chain to do that because because somebody's probably going to complain to your VP or SVP. I have had this happen. I had an SVP who apparently fielded a lot of these complaints over the years and just never told me about it. But now I know he gets them. So I'm trying to plan ahead. So I want to make sure that they all know and they're all on board. And having the executives on board is also really important for another reason, which is I want everybody to agree that, yes, we are doing this thing. We're doing the thing. Because the next step is accountability. And we agreed that we would do this, and in very measurable terms. So for that ACL example, everybody's going to do it by this date. I'm going to be tracking how your organization is doing, right? And I will put up a graph and say, like, here's how your organization is doing. Here are how many more services you just put in and you didn't put ACLs on them, and that, you have a problem. So you have some analytics insights in there if possible. But then you start saying, hey, your org isn't making progress on this. Why is that? Now, here's the thing. If you're talking to like an SVP, they almost certainly do not know the answer to that. If you just tell an SVP about their org, all they're gonna do is look at it and go, that sounds bad. They don't know what to do. So what you need is a drill down dashboard where if they click on it, they know exactly who to go yell at. And when that person needs to go yell at somebody, they know exactly who to go yell at, right? And they will go down and they will find you an answer. And you can say, oh, this isn't working for these people. Great. Or they need to be taught some things. Or the tools aren't working over in this place. Or they're just not doing it, and we need to go remind them. But and then you say like, congratulations, such and such team. I'm gonna go tell your executives that you are doing a really good job at this. Hey, such and such team, like you're falling behind. What's going on? How can we help? Right? When we show up when somebody's having a problem, that's another place where you don't want to make assumptions. You show up and it's like, hey, we noticed that there's a problem here. Do you need help? Is something going on? And, sometimes it's things like their system is just massively on fire and they can't keep it up. And they need problem solving on that stuff. Or, and then you start going and you can help them talk to their executives about how to get their other problem solved so that they can do this. But holding that accountability on the whole company, and it's not that I'm holding the company accountable. I am helping us hold ourselves accountable.
Yeah. So once again, we're in this together. I'm providing the visibility. I've created the alignment. And then when you're not succeeding, I'm here to help you succeed.
Bingo.
I love it. Well, I think we are just about at time. Were there any other topics that you really wanted to talk about?
I think one thing that is really important that I've had a lot of conversations with people about over the years is they'll say, well, I told them X. And the person on the other end of the conversation, for whatever reason, they didn't hear X. And then the answer to that is, okay, your job is not to say X. Your job is to say whatever it takes to get X into the brain of the person that you're talking to. If you need to say it a different way, you need to say something that to you sounds kind of different but causes them to understand the thing that you are trying to convey. That's the thing you need to do. And that that movement from seeing communication as a thing that you do to other people to a something that happens between you, right? And the goal is not to say something. The goal is to have something in people's heads. Another one is dashboards. I have total pet peeves about dashboards. So many of them. But one of my really big pet peeves about dashboards is that people will say, oh, here's some numbers about our project. Here's some numbers about our service. Here's some numbers about our product. Great. And then I look at it and I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this? And they say, well, we want people to know these things. And you're like, why? And then you get a couple answers, right? One of them is we want people to know that we're working, which that's just not a good technique for having people know that you are doing a good job. The second one is they might be able to use this information for something, and for those people, I want to shift their mindset to every time you have somebody look at a dashboard, you need to know what it is that you want them to do. Not know, do. If somebody goes and looks at your dashboard that has to do with open vulnerabilities, they should look at that dashboard and go, oh no, I need to fix things, and then go fix things. Your dashboard is not actually a goal. Your dashboard is a tool that you use to cause people to do things that are actually part of your goal. That's actually a good rule for communication in general, of what do I want people to do when I see this? And that's for two reasons. One, it's better targeted. The other one is that there's a limited communication bandwidth for any human being. Like, we just don't have that much communication bandwidth. And when you're addressing a really large group of people, your communication, like the number of bits that you can get through, just dives, which means you need to do a lot of repetition, and it means that you can only get across a couple of things. So you should be using those bits that you have really, really, really carefully. So if you're sending out an email about your big initiative to the company, what is it that you want people to do when they see that email? If you have a dashboard, nobody's going to look at the dashboard unless it actually helps them do something. What is it that you want them to do when they look at that dashboard? When you have a conversation with somebody, you should, especially if it's a conversation, like it's not necessarily a weekly one-on-one, but like something that happens more rarely or happens only once, or it's a really expensive meeting with a lot of senior people in it. What is it that you want to happen as a result of this? What do you want people to do? Humans are hard. I think there's a lot of things there. There's a lot of things that aren't, I think, but it's once they get messy, they get really, really messy. Like there was a little girl who had a little curl right in the middle of her forehead. And when she was good, she was very, very good. And when she was bad, she was horrid. People problems are very much of the same bimodal distribution.
All right, that's it for this Human Skills interview. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking this video and subscribing to this channel. You can also subscribe to the Human Skills newsletter, which there's a link to right down below, to get notified of interviews like this as they come out. Take care, y'all. This is K-Ball signing out.